Hi Setu, can you share screen, enable share screen for Annie?
She needs to start sharing and then we can kick it off.
Annie, you can start sharing. So maybe once, okay, so just let me give a quick intro and then you can start, Annie. So hi, good morning, guys, of Singapore AIML community, and we are super excited to kickstart our boot camp. And nothing better than having Annie with us today to speak on AI and ethics. So Annie, I mean, we love her, we adore her, and I'm sure she doesn't need any intro. But still, just for for people who are new and for quick heads up, so she is the APAC developer relations at Microsoft, and that is just a very short introduction for her. She's a very decorated personality and graced many international forums as keynote speaker and up for women empowerment, leadership forums, all those stuff. Okay, she has extensive experience for leveraging technology for innovation and for growth. And having said that, there's no better way to kickstart the bootcamp than Annie talking about AI and ethics. So we all know the good side of ML, but how to execute it responsibly is something which Annie is going to talk about today. So Annie, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Priyanka. Uh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you and the community today. Um, Great pulling together of a fantastic two-day event, Priyanka, Setu, Saktis, and the entire team. So kudos to you guys. Let me just dive into the topic we have at hand. So responsible AI is has been a buzzword for some time now. And today, what we'll do is kind of unwrap it a little bit and see what it means for us as developers and developer decision makers. This is the first generation of humans, if you will, who is going to um, make decisions using a computer which were only made by humans before. What this means is a huge impact on people and on society. So there are great benefits ahead. Many of you may already be using AI models without knowing we are actually using it every day on our smartphone or any of the other decisions that are handed down to us, etc. But a lot of us today in this call actually work on those systems. And we know that there are great benefits ahead, but there are also rough edges and probably inadvertent outcomes. And this is the first generation that is actually using computers to take these decisions, and we have to get it right. A meta analysis of 20 years of published research found that Black patients were 22% less likely than whites to get any pain medication and 29% less likely to be treated with opioids. Interesting study, right? Well, research also shows that doctors take the pain of women less seriously than the pain of men, prescribing less pain medication with longer delays and more often ascribing pain to psychogenic causes. Well, we do live in a society that's unfair and biased. The whole point in focusing on fairness in AI systems we develop and deploy is to reduce its bias and unfairness, not to keep it at the same level or even make it worse by just adding scale to this biases that we have. And AI systems are going to be hugely impactful in some industries more than the others, say criminal justice, hiring, credit, healthcare, insurance. So we need to make sure that these societal stereotypes are not reinforced. Now, why are AI systems so different from other tech systems? There are two things that are creating this importance. One is a pace of innovation. The amount of compute and storage and advancements in algorithms that are today available is far more than in the last 30 years. The other part is the proximity to human intelligence. Now, Microsoft reached human parity, I think, in speech recognition in 2017. We were the first to reach reading comprehension human parity in 2018, and then followed by machine translation, speech synthesis near human parity. In 2019, we had the general language understanding human parity. Now, what this human parity means is that, for example, if you look at speech, if you have an automated system speaking out a line to you and you have a human speaking out a line to you, you will not be able to make out a difference. What does that mean? When you get a call from a call agent, you don't know whether it's an automated system or a or a person, real person, and that changes the whole dynamics. It changes how you share information, privacy, all sorts of things. And so as technology is advancing, the regulations and laws around it also need to advance. Today's debate all around, maybe the last 2 3 years, have been about this almost daily in the newspapers. You know about the Chinese glass walls, where they were doing facial recognition of people walking in and out. The police has been using actual eyeglasses to identify people on the roads who are missing or who have a wrong identity and things like that. And those systems were useful in actually cracking criminal cases. But the point is that for every 6 cases they cracked, probably there are 6 million people whose privacy is impacted. Similarly, sometime back on Bing, for example, if you do a CEO search, only white males will show up. And recently, one of my friends who's a senior tech leader was saying that she has a 11-year-old daughter and was telling her, hey, you should try to do some, get into coding. This is the new trend. You should go try it. The girl went away, did her research for some time, came back and said, Mama, it's a boys' world. And why is that? Because everything she is searching on the net is just throwing up boys and men doing stuff. Well, there are women doing this out there, but the search is not probably showing it up. Similarly, deepfakes, you know about that. So there are a bunch of debates going on in our world today. So a year or two back, Stack Overflow did this survey. It's very interesting. I want to share this with you. What would developers do if asked to write code for an unethical purpose? So only 60% said an equivocal no. And the others were like, okay, it depends on what it is. And maybe yes. Who is ultimately responsible for code that accomplishes something unethical? Well, half, almost or more than half thought the upper management of the company. Or 30% came with person who came up with the idea or the developer who wrote it. Do developers have an obligation to consider the ethical implications of their code? 80% said yes, but another 20% weren't sure about it. Interesting outcomes and results, right? Now, responsible AI is a complex, broad topic because responsibility lies at every point of the development of the model, right from the business understanding to the people who are saying a certain algorithm needs to be made or a certain solution is required, to data acquisition and understanding, to modeling, to deployment and ops. So there is a whole lot of responsibility spread across stakeholders. And there isn't one element you can identify and just integrate into the systems to make it fair. It relates not just into tech, but also into the societal context. It's literally a socio-technical challenge, and it needs a greater diversity. It means we have to get greater diversity of people developing and deploying AI systems. Assumptions and decisions made at every step of the development and deployment life cycle can introduce biases. And so it's really not something in an organization that you delegate to two people and move on, but everybody needs to be active and thinking about it. At Microsoft, our journey started in 2016 when Satya posed this question: to a bunch of leaders. And he penned an article introducing the concepts of responsible AI. Following that, we formed the Ether Committee, which looks at accountability, ethics, and it's a very cross-functional committee with about 7 working groups, just like the hot pot of deep thinking and innovation happening there. And 2018, we established our AI principles. We One of the things that came up was the wide prevalent use of facial recognition and the need for even these solution providers to actually take action on that. So we published some facial recognition principles and called for regulation on that. In 2019, we had the Office of Responsible AI formed, pilot of the Responsible AI standard, and in 2020, the entire organization is getting trained on what is responsible AI. It's everyone's responsibility. What do you look out for? And similar things. So I would like to share our approach to responsible AI. And I said it's an evolving journey, and each organization, each group of people, each person has to think about it on your own. But there are things that we do at Microsoft that is easily shareable and could guide you in this journey. So we look at it in 3 parts. There are principles: fairness, inclusive, transparency, accountability, reliability and safety, and privacy and security. And then there are practices which help people actually practice this. So there are ethics committees, there's a governance, there's a methodology for this, and then there is documentation that needs to be maintained. And then, as you know, it's not easy for developers in particular to, as it is, you need a lot of tools. And if AI is something that sits apart from your regular workflow and system, that's going to be difficult. So you need tools to help you do practice all this: homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, interpret ML, data drift, fair learn. These are a few things that we're bringing on board to make sure that it's easier for us to be responsible. I just mentioned this. Now let's look at it one by one. Fairness. This is a story of this is the first principle, if you will. And for AI, this means that AI systems should treat everyone fairly and avoid affecting similarly situated groups of people in different ways. I just mentioned earlier about how the Black population were getting less medication, or women were getting delays because they were not, everything was being attributed to psychogenic and things like that. So think about fairness from that perspective. The point about this is that each of us carry inherited biases, and of course, this affects our decisions. Now, in order to make sure that AI is fair and not programmed to make biases or discriminatory decisions, um, we need to think about intelligibility and biases, identifying biases at each stage. And this is one of the largest fields of AI ethics research. It is not a solved challenge. So that's the first thing that we must acknowledge. Now, this is also the reason why inclusiveness is different, why women in AI different, and why Asians in AI is different. If you look at systems already in flight and in play, global systems that are being used, you will see that there's a lot of white Caucasian male as part of it. And if you look at the top leading people in AI, it's predominantly white Caucasian male. And what does that mean for fairness in these systems? And so it's actually up to all of us to make sure. And what this also does is the impact of not having fairness in the system is that, for example, healthcare benefits. If the system is not fair, the amount of the value of healthcare benefit coming down to non-whites or blacks or colored people is going to be lower. um, the Take the current COVID situation. If there are algorithms which are biased, who do you think would get the vaccines first, and then the rest? So it's super critical that there is no unfairness, or the fairness is removed and biases are removed, at the stages in which uh, design and development and deployment is made. So it's going to impact each and every one of us. Reliability and safety. So autonomous driving is one area that we all know where there's a lot of algorithmic. It's all driven on AI models, right? So the question posed from this research was: is an aggregate failure rate of 5% okay? So this particular research was to assess the time it would take to say that an autonomous vehicle is can pass the test to be put on the road. Well, even if you wanted to demonstrate with 95% confidence and 80% power that this failure rate for this car is 20% better than a human driver failure rate, it would take them 11 billion miles in 500 years, and that's impossible, right? There's no car that's going to be driven for 11 billion miles in 500 years before it gets on the road. What does it mean for us? It really means that it's an evolving system. Of course, testing needs to adapt and innovate. Really, a lot of innovation is required in the testing of these systems, but also regulations and laws, because there is going to be failure. It's not going to be 100%. So when there is failure, what's the recourse? Who's accountable? How do you correct the system basis this? All of those things, and of course on the regulatory side it will have to evolve with this, and we don't know how it is currently. It will evolve. It's kind of a thing about the whole probably early 1920s, when it was a horse-led economy and suddenly there were automobiles on the road, and people didn't know how to manage regulations. When cars are on the road, they only knew horses, and a whole new regulatory framework came into place, and that's where we are today. Um, Privacy and security. This is a story out of Canada, where this particular mall, in which runs Cadillac Fairview, has runs a lot of those malls in Canada, and they were asked to take this off completely, and they removed this system because the directory where people are going in trying to access and find out, they were using facial recognition there to decide the gender, what's the propensity to shopping, and maybe show some ads and things like that. Now what happened was, in one consumer actually saw this window open where it showed up as a facial recognition software, and he raised the flag, and then quickly Cadillac pulled back the system. Now, privacy and security is a huge, huge problem. Just think about the other case that was pretty prominent, Roomba, which was kind of tracking. I mean, you could let the Roomba map out the rooms in your house, and then it would plan how it goes about cleaning your whole room. And then in 2016, I think, um, that particular software actually had a vulnerability, and it opened millions of people's data out to others. So they had to pull that back. So thinking about privacy and security is core to this. Inclusiveness, and how would a developer look at it? This is interesting. LinkedIn's economic graph research showed that they looked at a class of MBA and looked at how they would be perceived by a recruitment firm. And if you're looking at the LinkedIn data, they found that the male students actually would put clear summaries, would put in very detailed profiles, and the women were not so um, uh, probable to put that. Most women were not putting it in. But well, they are from the same class, the same set of competencies and skills, but they were just different behaviors. Now imagine the recruitment system that is going to just look at LinkedIn data as one key parameter. Now that will be thrown off target, right? You will miss out the really good candidates, and these are the small um, nuggets of gold, if you will, when you're looking at building right models and systems. You have to look beyond what is obvious and look at why, and then be able to make sure that your models are catering to that. Now, what happens when you can't? This is about transparency. When you can't explain what happens in, think about healthcare for a minute, or maybe even insurance, or some credit loan facility. Now, in this case of healthcare, and there are benefits, and probably there are prioritization of patients in as to who would get what benefit when. Let us just look at the current coronavirus situation. And if algorithms are deciding which set of people get in first phase, who in the second, and who in the third, and if you say frontline responders first, even within frontline responders, they will still have to categorize who gets first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Which countries get first when you look at it from a global system. Now, if this is biased, for sure, the entire bias is going to cascade and scale, and it's going to impact. And people will start asking questions. When you see two people in the same situation, and one getting and one not getting, obviously questions will come up. There could be liabilities, there could be legal issues. Think about the agents who are front facing and they have to answer and they don't know what to answer. It's just something that the algo um, popped up. So this is going to just deplete trust in AI. And without trust, AI is not going to go mainstream. It's going to be riddled with issues and legal issues and doubts and self-doubts and users going away from it. So explainability becomes a core element. Transparency becomes a core element. Accountability, of course. I spoke about the facial recognition piece and the fact that um, organizations have accountability here, but each person in the loop also have accountability. Now, a quick look at Microsoft's AI practices, and this could be quite interesting for our developer audiences. So the first one is Envision. So this is a place where you are asking crucial questions to see what's the potential impact on people and society. So ask questions like, who are the stakeholders? Are they diverse? What are the key benefits to these stakeholders? What is the potential harm or the harms that could be introduced by the systems? These are questions. If you look at this cycle, it's pretty much like your software development life cycle. But the questions you ask at each of this stage to make sure that you're practicing responsible AI is what will allow you to practice responsible AI. So we look at it from these perspective. The second one is phase at define, where you're defining the major components of the system and responsible release criteria. So here you ask questions like, what criteria does your product have related to each of your principles? And you look at fairness, you look at privacy, you look at transparency, each of those criteria, and ask, what's your product criteria related to that? What metrics will you use when you know, and when will you know you have met the criteria? Then in the prototype stage is where you're defining the system. How do you design and implement decisions um, affecting your users? Are you designing it to be robust to errors? Is it inclusive and fair? How does the data affect the system? How do your modeling decisions affect the system? We know that if you want more transparency, you can use linear regression, but that means less accuracy. And if I want more accuracy, I can go to deep neural networks, but that means less transparency. And these are trade-offs, right? And you will have to make a trade-off between transparency and accuracy at many points in your career. So think deeply about that. For a minute, you will think about data and how your data could be inherently biased by the source of data. A good case in point is the fact that Fitbits are currently being used in almost 300 clinical trials in healthcare. And did you know that Fitbits and wearables like this cannot accurately track heart rates in people of color as much as accurately it can do with white people? Of course, there are racial differences in our in our entire biology and psychology, and we need at every point, depending on what system we are building, to be aware that you have to go 2 3 steps further to understand, dig deeper to understand where you're getting the data from. It's not just enough to make sure that there is a diversity of data. You have to go beyond that. And then, about while you're doing the prototype, so Microsoft recently, a year back, launched Fairlearn. Fairlearn is something that you can use, run in your systems, and do a test of how fair is my system. So use toolkits like that. The next phase is launch, and that's a real world where, and this is what everyone's waiting for, right? The launch, and this is where you get real world feedback channels, and you need to have real world feedback channels and escalation process in place. This is not a launch once and forget, but think of an AI system as a living, breathing system out there, which needs constant review. So document how your system meets all the requirements. Do you have a rollout plan that enables feedback, that minimizes risk? And do you have a plan to handle unforeseen issues? Is super important, because obviously there will be unforeseen issues, as it's an evolving field, and you should have a plan to handle that. And last of all is evolve. So, as I said, think of it as an evolving, living, breathing system. Monitor it periodically and analyze its ongoing impact. So, think about things like, does the product achieve your long term goals? Does it help people achieve their goals? Is anything changing? And ultimately, the whole point of this that we think at Microsoft is that humanizing this is the ultimate thing. So it's about making sure that the AI practices and the AI systems we create are as humane as possible. So the journey is literally in our mind in 3 parts. One is about innovating responsibility, the other is about empowering you and others, and the last about fostering positive impact. I'll invite you to check out the AI Business School at the high level to understand these theories. There are industry case studies, and there are practical tools and guidances. When you are starting off at your organization, think about company wide governance, think about the practices and tooling innovations that you can bring. And of course, from Microsoft, we have tons of AI for good grants. So if you have awesome AI for good solutions, do submit them to Microsoft. And if it is accepted, then you actually get our AI engineers to work with you, and not only cloud credits and stuff, but more than that. So I hope this sets your journey in AI off to a good start, giving you some interesting points to think about and build responsibility into everything you do. I invite you to join our community. Just scan this QR code and join us, so we can keep in touch and get on this journey together. Thank you. Over to you, Priyanka. I see a question here. Do you foresee governments all over the world would form AI algorithm software auditing committee or policies to ensure that the AI products, outputs, and recommendations are fair and square? That comes from Ankit Purohit. Yes, I think Singapore last week, there are agencies within Singapore which actually released some of these guidelines. So, absolutely, yes. I think this is a this is a journey right now. we still don't have all the answers. Microsoft is part of a group called respon- responsible AI. There are a few consortiums in which we are a part of, along with, and we helped, our Ether committee members actually helped kickstart those groups. And now I think it includes Google, Amazon, you name it. About 80 companies are part of that. And this particular group is working towards exactly this, creating frameworks and how do you assess who is responsible, how do you audit. So all of these principles and practices are being developed, which can be then adopted worldwide. So governments absolutely need to play a part, because a lot of this is, say, criminal justice, for example, is going to be um, core responsibility for government. Even the current scenario of getting the COVID vaccines out is a core responsibility of governments. And how do you go about it without algorithms? You do need it, but you do need auditing committees, policies, etc. So yes, Ankit, I think uh, I don't think any government has it all right yet, but all governments will need to get there. Okay. I think if there are no more questions, then I will hand it over back to the organizers. Thank you.
on extracting value for your business with AI.